Brendan Dassey trial transcript day 8, continuing on page 112. That's true. In watching that video, Dr. Gordon, don't you remember several instances, in fact, over a dozen instances, where a specific suggestion was presented to Brendan and Brendan actively resisted? In other words, Brendan said that didn't happen that way. Do you remember that? Yes. That's not in your report? No. Did you think that was important to include in your report? Well, obviously I didn't, or I would have included it. Go back to the very first question about including things that help versus don't help your ultimate opinion. Is this one of those circumstances? In other words, when Brendan actively says, no, it didn't happen that way, that doesn't support your opinion about vulnerability to suggestion, does it? No. You said that Brendan's school records weren't provided to you until after you rendered this opinion. Those school records, correct me if I'm wrong, but they include behavioral records and progress notes and what are called IEP reports. Isn't that right? That's right. Those are notes from school teachers and school psychologists and even on occasion a parent or two talking about some problems or some areas that Brendan needed to work on in a school setting. Is that right? True. One of the areas that the school record specifically addressed was Brendan's memory. Is that true? True. Now, what was the state, at least from the records that you received, at least up through the fall of 2005, what was the state of Brendan's memory? And are you able, in reviewing those school records, to differentiate between a short-term memory and his long-term memory? I know it was a longer question, and I can break it up if you need me to. I suspect that you'll be able to answer that. I could answer that if I reviewed the records. I dog-eared the pages. I took a close look, but I didn't commit it to memory. All right. So I could look again if you'd like. Brendan, at least from the school records, didn't have the greatest memory in the world. Is that fair to say? That's fair. All right. And whether it was long-term or short-term memory, at least for Brendan, and from a school or a book learning standpoint, Brendan had some challenges or deficits in that area. Is that right? That's true. Would you expect, by the way, somebody with a, not only a fourth grade reading level, but somebody with Brendan's memory deficits to be able to, in great detail, remember let's say, facts or details of a novel that he read maybe 4 years ago? I can't really comment on that because if it was a complicated novel, no, but that if I don't know the book. How about a novel written for adults rather than for kids? Well, then I doubt that. That just wouldn't seem reasonable to you, would it? I don't know. The school records don't mention anywhere about suggestibility, do they? In other words, did you see any notations in the records that Brendan was either highly suggestible or influenced by either classmates or other people? I didn't read the word suggestible in the school records. Did you read the word influence anywhere? I don't recall. That Brendan was easily influenced? I don't recall that. If a school psychologist, Chris Schonenberger Gross, who the testimony established knew Brendan, administered tests directly to Brendan, and did review all of those records, testified that there were no such entries, you wouldn't quarrel with that conclusion, would you? No, I depend on the opinions of school psychologists. And school psychologists and teachers, and those that meet with Brendan on a more regular or daily basis, at least from a historical standpoint, are probably in a better position to gauge those kinds of things than you after meeting with him twice. Is that right? No, that's not right, because they didn't administer the same tests and review collateral data that I did, although it's very helpful to have that kind of collateral data from the teachers. They're inaudible. So you don't know? Inaudible. Very important. You don't know if those teachers administer IQ tests, do you? Teachers don't generally administer IQ tests, but they sometimes, the school psychologists don't know if she administered IQ tests. I misspoke. I can look, I don't recall. I have to get them out. It will take me a while. Well, maybe I'm going to go on to another question. Do you know if the Mishicot School District characterized or categorized Brendan as having any cognitive disability? I do know that. And do you know what that result was? It was that he did have a cognitive disability. Well, that he had learning problems, and why don't you look at his 2005 IEP report? There will be some boxes there, checked there, about whether he has a cognitive disability or not. That should be easy to find. 2005, what date, please? Attorney Freeman, are there, Attorney Kratz, probably late. Attorney Freeman, are there exhibits that can actually be used and would Attorney Kratz. While Mr. Fallon is looking for that, I can go on to another series of questions. Did you ever talk to the school psychologist, Chris Schonenberger Gross? No. Why not? I felt no need to. I'm sorry? I didn't feel it was necessary. Did you ever talk to any of Brendan's teachers? No, I reviewed their comments. There are some standard scores now that I find them, if you would like me to go over them, counsel. No, I'm asking for whether or not the school believed Brendan to have a cognitive disability. That was my question. I can't find that. I just can't find the standard scores of some. You didn't talk to Chris, I'm sorry to interrupt you. You didn't talk to Chris Schonenberger Gross or any of his teachers because you didn't think you needed to. Is that your answer? I thought this information was sufficient and helpful to me. All right. How about Brendan's parent or parents? Did you talk to Brendan's mother? No. How come? For I felt that I was able to form a conclusion without relying on her input. All right. You didn't think you needed family opinions as to Brendan's suggestibility, or that whether or not he was easily influenced to render this opinion? No, I would place more value on opinions of individuals who are teachers and psychologists because their opinions were made before this court case and more likely to be objective. All right, let's talk about other statements that Brendan made. You said that you reviewed the February 27 interview of officers. You interviewed a May 1 videotape of officers. Were you also made aware several months before February 27 of statements Brendan made to other family members, specifically to one of his cousins, Kayla Avery? I was made aware of those, but I don't recall it now. I'm sorry. Were you aware that in late December, Brendan Dassey told one of his cousins that he saw Teresa pinned up in Stephen Avery's house? I was aware of that, yes. You were? Yes. Did you consider that statement and the fact that it's 3 months before the March 1 statement, the one where suggestibility is commented upon, the fact that that statement was made 3 months before, you find that significant, or did you include that in your report? That was included in my report. Did you find that significant as to your ultimate opinion as to Brendan's suggestibility? It could, but sometimes individuals make statements for sensational reasons, including even admitting that they stole the Lindbergh baby, and there were hundreds of people that came forth acknowledging that. So, okay, well, setting Mr. Lindbergh aside, if you can talk about this case, that's good. Did you not think that Brendan Dassey's cousin retelling a school counselor and telling the police that Brendan Dassey said that he saw Teresa tied up or pinned up in a house was relevant as to the March 1 statement wherein you commented as to his suggestibility? It's a yes or no question. It's relevant, yes. Did you believe that Brendan's statement to his cousin that he saw body parts in a fire at the same time was relevant as to your opinion as to suggestibility? It's relevant that he said it, yes. The fact that Brendan Dassey said in late December that he heard Teresa screaming before he went into that house, you believe that's relevant to your opinion as to suggestibility of the March 1 statement? It's relevant, but I can't make a determination regarding the accuracy of those statements and their reliability thereof for all the questions you've been asking me in this series. Those are statements that are several months, or at least they're alleged to have been made several months before this March 1 statement. Do you understand that? I do. Are you also aware of, and did you include statements that Brendan Dassey made, admissions that Brendan Dassey made a couple of months after the March 1 statement? Yes. You were aware of statements he made to his mother about the confession? That is, why didn't you tell me? Brendan answered, I was scared. Do you remember, and did you review that statement made from Brendan to his, mother? I'm sorry, I thought you were finished. Yes. That Brendan's mother told him, if you would have told me, Teresa would have still been alive. And Brendan said, yeah. Do you remember reviewing that particular telephone call? I don't remember that telephone call. I'm sorry. Do you remember Brendan being asked by his mother, did you do all of that stuff to her? And Brendan replying, some of it. Do you remember reviewing that particular statement? I believe so. By the way, are any of those statements made months after March 1 statement, do you believe to be relevant to your conclusion as to suggestibility, at least as it relates to the March 1 statement? It may. It's relevant to consider. Whether it's relevant to consider. It would be relevant if Brendan Dassey apologized to the victim's family in his words for what I did to her. Would that be a relevant statement as to suggestibility of the March 1 statement? It would be something to consider. Did you consider it? Yes. And despite all of those statements, despite the statements months before and months after, consistent with what he told the police, you still believe that Brendan was vulnerable to suggestibility. Is that true? Absolutely. Doctor, my client or my colleague, Mr. Fallon, is going to show you Exhibit 219. First of all, tell us what this is and what the date on the top of that report is. What that is, it's evaluation report for Brendan Dassey, determination of eligibility for special education, dated September 29, 2005. Does that particular form have a checkbox or a place where the school can determine whether or not, in their opinion, Brendan has a cognitive disability? It has a place for that. And is that box checked on Brendan's form? No, what is checked is specific order of disability. Some speech and language issues, specific learning disability, and the other one was speech or language impairment. There are the two that were checked. Now, Brendan's statement to his cousin about seeing Teresa tied up or pinned up in the house, seeing body parts in the fire, and hearing Teresa screaming, and Brendan's statements months afterwards to his mother, did those impact or did you consider those statements when Brendan told you he was scared he was going to be arrested? I don't know because I don't know in what order I received that information or reviewed it, at which time I interviewed him. After the fact, it could be related. Okay, Dr. Gordon, the concept of false confessions, we heard about that as set aside or as different from suggestibility. I want to ask you just a couple of questions about that. You're aware in your work in this area of several studies that deal with false confessions, isn't that true? Yes. A couple of the preeminent authors in this area are two individuals in California named Mr. Is it Dreesen or Drizzen and Leo, is that correct? That's right. And another is a person by the name of Brett Trowbridge. You're familiar with their work? Yes. Is it fair? Trowbridge, no, I'm thinking of that name. There must be someone else, or the same. I printed up last night regarding a sexually violent person and sex offender commitment, so I'll limit my inquiry then to what you are familiar with. Would be the Drizzen, is it Drizzen or Dreesen? That I don't know. Drizzen and Leo, Drizin, you understand? Yes. You read that name at least, and in their study, which is in fact one of the preeminent works in false confession, you'd agree with that, wouldn't you? They've conducted many studies, so I don't know which one you're referring to. Mr. Drizzen and Leo indicate, and do you agree with this statement, that most false confessions, now we're getting into the area of false confessions versus suggestibility, are the result of tactics by police which are so impermissible, most of which include physical violence like beatings. Is that what you find? That's not my reading. Well, we need to back up. They are not the only authorities in the field. Secondly, not only are they not the only authorities in the field, but they do talk about extreme torture as a way to get false confessions. There are chapters that they've done and studies on that, but they're also published extensively, like I said, even on things such as mild pressure, criticism. So how about we do this? If you can't answer yes or no, then you can let me know, all right? If you can, doctor, I'd appreciate it. Are you familiar with Mr. Drizzen and Leo's proposition that most false confessions are the result of such extreme police conduct, impermissible conduct that can, and often does, include physical violence or beatings of suspects? Yes. Familiar that their studies indicate that most false confessions are the result of very long, sometimes interrogations that last into the days rather than just an hour, 2, or even 3 hours. You're familiar with that? True. Now, in our case, that is, in the March 1 videotape of Mr. Dassey, Mr. Fallon will take care of that for you. Thank you, sir. Brendan's first admissions, that is, his first admissions of criminal involvement in this case, don't happen at the 3-hour or the 4-hour mark, but they happen really within and right around the 1-hour mark. Is that a fair recollection of? Yes. Your review? Yes. So that at least as it relates to false confessions is extremely inconsistent with Mr. Drizzen and Leo's findings. That is, it being within an hour or 2 rather than 6, 8 hours, 12 hours, days of confession. That's fair, isn't it? I can't answer that, not the way it was phrased. You told this jury that you were not familiar with the works of Brett Trowbridge when he deals with the 3 different types of false confessions. Oh, if I asked you questions about that, might that refresh your memory? I think others have characterized it in those 3 categories as well. So